Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Cryptic ball python. You may not have heard of the Cryptic. It's actually a really new gene, and a lot of people are really taking a keen interest in the Cryptic. And it's kind of interesting here in 2020, I'm watching a lot of these really big breeders work the Cryptic through their collection, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And a lot of times, you know, you get these new genes and you don't really know what's happening when you work it into other combinations. And as far as we can tell, it looks like it's a recessive mutation, and in addition, it's also allelic with clown. If you actually have one copy of the Cryptic, one copy of the clown, you get a visual effect that almost pretty much looks exactly like the Cryptic, which is kind of wild. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to dig a little bit deeper into the Cryptic gene. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com, and I want to start with this snake right here. This is actually a Cryptic, and it's kind of interesting watching a lot of breeders work with the Cryptic and breeding it through their collection. A lot of times they'll breed it through and they'll make these results and they'll be like, I don't understand what's going on. As a matter of fact, I saw one where they took a Cryptic, which we think has 2 copies of the Cryptic gene. They bred it to a clown, which has 2 copies of the recessive clown gene, and they actually produced a whole clutch of offspring, and they all looked like Cryptics, and they were scratching their head. That's like, that is impossible. You can't do that. And the only thing, you know, it's kind of funny, kind of watching them, you know, process all the results from the breeding, trying to figure out what's going on. And the only thing that they can think of what's really going on is that the offspring have 1 copy of the Cryptic gene, 1 copy of the clown gene, and the visual effect is exactly the same as the Cryptic, which is kind of interesting. It's almost like, I guess it's almost like if you're looking at the albinos versus the candies, and you breed them together, you get the candinos with 1 copy of the albino, 1 copy of the candy. Although with the candinos, you can tell the difference between the candinos and the albinos and the toffees. There's a visual effect. And it seems like with the Cryptics, you really can't tell the difference between the 2 copies of the Cryptic and 1 copy of the Cryptic, 1 copy of the clown. And the other thing that's kind of interesting, watching all these breeders kind of sort it all out and trying to figure out what's going on, is they're trying to kind of get together, put their heads together, and come up with names for some of the combinations. So it's interesting, the combination of the Cryptic and the clown combination that looks like a Cryptic. I've seen quite a few names get thrown out, and I think they're pretty much going to stick with the Krypton, the Cryptic and the Krypton. So the Krypton is with 1 copy of the clown, 1 copy of the Cryptic, and then the Cryptic, of course, is with 2 copies of the Cryptic. If you just have 1 copy of the Cryptic, then it would be het Cryptic because it's a recessive gene. It gets a little bit confusing with a new gene, and they're trying to figure it out. It's pretty wild actually watching them kind of work through the whole process with the new gene. I actually wanted to show you this snake. Take a look at this. This is actually listed as a Krypton Cryptic, so it's either one or the other. And as far as we can tell, you know, what a lot of the breeders are actually saying that you can't tell the difference. And if you actually, as a matter of fact, if you actually go back and kind of look at the characteristics of the Cryptic, essentially what it is a lot of times it'll have this kind of a wide, it's like a stripe right through the eye, and as it gets further back in the head, you can see it widen. It's pretty much a really good characteristic that you have either a Cryptic or a Krypton, and a lot of them actually have this really long stripe right down the back of the neck. Sometimes it's on the top of the neck, and sometimes it's on the side of the neck, and sometimes it can actually have a lot of kind of blushing coming up the sides. I've seen a lot of combinations. We have quite a bit of white coming up the sides, and a lot of times it'll really jumble up the pattern in a lot of combinations. It can make some really crazy looking combinations. So if you actually go back to this, here's one of the most confusing things. If you actually come over to Morphmarket and you look for the Krypton or the Cryptic, I actually looked for the Cryptic, and it's really confusing because it's brand new, nobody knows what's going on. It'll actually bring up like a grayed out gene, the Cryptic, so it's not really listed as dominant, co-dominant, or recessive. Sometimes they kind of put them grayed out until I can actually figure out what is going on with the Cryptic. And as a matter of fact, if this was actually a Krypton, essentially what this would be a triple het. This would be het Desert Ghost, it would be het Clown, and het Cryptic. And the het Clown and het Cryptic together make the Krypton, which is kind of crazy. So I'm actually seeing a lot of snakes listed over here as clowns, possible het Cryptic, which I think they kind of came out at the beginning of the project, because technically, if this is actually true, if they're actually allelic, it's impossible to have 3 or more copies of the same, like a compatible gene. So if you have allelic genes, you really can't combine them. So technically you couldn't have a Cryptic clown because you'd have 4 copies of a compatible gene. It'd be like having like a super lesser super Mojave. You couldn't have that all in the same snake. It would either be one or the other. Gets a little bit confusing with allelic combinations. So take a look at this. This is another example. So this is a Cryptic 66% clown, and you can definitely tell it's a Cryptic. You can see the eye stripe coming up in the head, and it kind of really widens out in the back right here. You can see a little bit of blushing coming up the sides, and you can almost see some of the stripe coming right on the neck here. So you definitely know it's either a Cryptic or a Krypton. So essentially what this is a Cryptic, or it has a 66% chance that it is a Krypton, with 1 copy of the Cryptic and 1 copy of the clown. As far as we know, this is correct, although it could change. A lot of people are like throwing this stuff out, and they're like, well, this is what we think is going on, but we don't know 100% sure. And as far as I know from all the videos that I watch, it seems like this is what's going on with the Cryptics and the Kryptons. So I kind of want to show you some of the potential working the Cryptic and the Krypton into some of the other combinations. It makes some really impressive visual results. And this is actually the pastel, one of the most common genes in all ball pythons. The pastel is essentially a yellow snake. It's co-dominant. And if you actually take a look at the pastel, it actually has a lot of these kind of alien heads. Sometimes it can have kind of a jumbled up pattern. But I noticed in a lot of the Kryptons or the Cryptics, a lot of times the patterns on the side will come up. Like this example right here, you can kind of see the alien head kind of branching out into the top. You'll see that a lot in the Kryptons, all the way up and down the snake, and the Kryptons and the Cryptics. And a lot of times, if you actually look at the head stamp on your Kryptons or Cryptics, you'll actually see a really crazy head pattern, which is pretty amazing. So here's what happens if you take the pastel and you mix in the Cryptic. Take a look at this. It really completely shatters the pattern. It really makes for a really visually stunning snake. Just the Cryptic and the pastel. And if you actually look at the head, it almost has a head, I'd say almost similar to a clown, which is kind of interesting. It really jumbles up the head stamp, and it really jumbles up the sides. If you actually take a look at the pattern, you can see some of the pattern on the side is like branching up into the pattern on the top, which is pretty characteristic of the Cryptic. And this is kind of interesting. So this is the pastel Cryptic, and it also is possible het clown. So this is either a Cryptic, or possibly it could be a Krypton with 1 copy of the Cryptic and 1 copy of the clown. So here is the super pastel. This is kind of an interesting combination when you work super pastel into the Cryptic. What happens is, essentially, if you actually look at the super pastel, and this one you can actually see, sometimes you'll have, sometimes it can kind of trick you on some of these markers, because this one you can see that kind of goes up a little bit into the top. It has this little branching similar to the Cryptic or Krypton, but this doesn't have the Cryptic in the mix. And you can definitely tell by the head stamp on this one that it is a super pastel with pretty much just a faded out head with regular lines and a kind of a regular head for a super pastel. And here's what happens if you take the super pastel and work it into the Cryptic. Take a look at this. This is pretty amazing. And I've noticed in a lot of these combinations, it seems like it really intensifies the yellow. They seem like they're super bright yellow with a really crazy pattern that's really jumbled up. And take a look at the head stamp on this. You can definitely tell that the Cryptic is definitely in there. And this one's also listed as the super pastel Cryptic 66% het clown, which we think, according to what we know now, this is either, 66% Krypton or it's a Cryptic. Kind of a crazy project to actually work on. So here's the Superfly. So this is the Super Pastel plus the Fire. And when I'm actually coming over here looking at some of these combinations, there's not a whole lot to choose from because there's not a lot of Cryptics that have actually been produced. So I'm kind of looking at just the small availability of the genes that are over here. And this is actually the Superfly, which is a combination of the Super Pastel and the Fire. And on this one, you can see the Super Pastel really jumbles up the pattern. And look at the head on this one. Pretty typical for a Super Superfly with a pretty blank head here, kind of a little dotted line right around the pattern on that. Sometimes you can really tell what's in there based on the head stamp of the pattern, and this one you really can. So take a look what happens if you take the Superfly and work it into the Cryptic. This is kind of amazing. Look at how it really changes and brightens it, and a lot of times it almost brings in like striping in some of the snakes. You can see the pattern like stretches. You have these little kind of like alien heads that even stretch even more, like a little bit wider right at the top, which is a pretty good indication. A lot of times you can see the blushing coming in on the side, and pretty much the dead giveaway is you definitely see a crazy head pattern with this one. This is actually Krypton. Well, this is kind of interesting if you actually look at the genes on this one. So this one is kind of, I guess you'd say this one's listed as good as you can get as far as being accurate in the genes. This is actually listed as the Cryptic and 100% het clown. So this has one copy of the Cryptic and one copy of the clown. So here is the pinstripe. The pinstripe's a little bit harder to actually see the Cryptic in because essentially the pinstripe has this stripe right along the back that you'll see in some combinations, and it's a really visually, dominant gene. And you can actually definitely tell that the Cryptic is in the pinstripe when you're working it. And kind of the cool thing I like about the pinstripe is it's a really bright gold snake. A lot of times it can be super bright gold, almost metallic looking sometimes. So here's what happens if you take the pinstripe and you work it into the Cryptic. Take a look at this. This is kind of an interesting combination. Essentially what happens is, I thought this was real interesting, that you really don't get a crazy head stamp on this one. Almost like the pinstripe is so visually dominant that it doesn't kind of jumble up the head. And at first I thought maybe it was the difference between Krypton and Cryptic with one copy of the clown in the mix. I was thinking maybe just the one copy of the clown kind of scrambles up the head pattern. And the more I looked at it, I don't think you can tell the Kryptons from the Cryptics just by looking at the head stamp. I think they're pretty much equal as far as I know, as far as what I'm looking at over here on Morphmarket. All this could be totally wrong, but so far, this is what we think. And take a look at how much white is coming up the sides. I've never seen a pinstripe with this kind of white right on the belly. It's kind of interesting that it didn't really have much of an effect as far as the pattern in the pinstripe. It's kind of an interesting combination. So here is the Lemon Blast. You can definitely see an influence in the Lemon Blast. And essentially what this is the pinstripe with the addition of pastel, which really jumbles up the pattern a little bit more. And a lot of times it'll bring out a little bit more yellow. And here's what happens if you take the Lemon Blast and you work it into the Cryptic. Take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. And essentially what it does is it takes the Lemon Blast and jumbles up the pattern even more. It almost looks like kind of like a confusion or something, where it really jumbles up the pattern a lot, and you can definitely see the white coming up the side on the Lemon Blast. And definitely, you can definitely, if you actually take a look at the head on this one, no change on the head, which is pretty interesting in this case. So take a look at this. This is the spot nose, and the spot nose is one of the genes that really jumbles up the pattern when you mix it in with a lot of combinations. And sometimes the spot noses can almost look like a normal ball python as a standalone morph. Sometimes they look almost like a normal pattern with the regular alien heads. And a lot of times, if you actually look at the head on the spot nose, you can see a definite pattern on the head. It definitely has a really distinguishable head stamp on the spot nose where you can definitely tell you have spot nose. Here's what happens if you work spot nose into the Cryptic. Take a look at this crazy combination. This is one of the most crazy things I've ever seen, and this is the ultimate potential of the Cryptic, working it into some of these pattern enhancing genes over here on Morphmarket. Take a look at that. It almost looks like it has pastel in it or something. Really crazy. I could just imagine if you actually worked like pastel and leopard and orange dream and fire into these combinations, you could get some of the craziest looking combinations. So this is actually the Cryptic. So this has two copies of the Cryptic, and this is, well, this is kind of so this is a Cryptic spot nose het clown. So this is either a Cryptic or it's a Krypton as far as the current understanding of the gene. So here's the last one I want to show you, the working phantom into it. This is pretty awesome. The phantom is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. And I'd say when most people think of phantom, they usually think of the purple passion. The combination of the phantom and the Mojave makes almost like a light lavender purple snake that is really, it's a really awesome combination. And the phantom by itself, if you actually work it into other genes, essentially what it is, it's a dark morph. It really darkens a lot of combinations. And here's what happens if you take phantom and work it into the cryptic. Take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. You get a real darkening effect of the background of the snake, and it really looks, you can definitely tell the cryptic is in here. You can kind of see the line coming from the eye and then kind of expanding right along the neck. That is an indication that you have a cryptic. And then you can definitely see the line coming right here, and you can see kind of the alien heads kind of stretching up to the top and some blushing on the sides. You can definitely see all the indicators for the cryptic or the krypton in the mix. So this is kind of interesting how they listed this. So this is actually listed as a phantom, cryptic, or krypton het desert ghost. And if you actually look at the genes over here, it gets a little bit confusing. So this one's actually listed as the phantom, 100% het desert ghost, and the cryptic. So technically this has 2 copies of the cryptic, or 1 copy of the cryptic and 1 copy of the clown. And I actually pulled up another snake over here, almost exactly the same. Take a look at this. This is actually a phantom triple hat. This is actually a cryptic, clown, desert ghost triple hat, which is pretty much exactly like that other snake. And then you can actually list it a little bit different over here. So this one actually has 100% het desert ghost, and then the clown, this should actually say het clown over here, and then it has 1 copy of the cryptic. So 1 copy of the clown, 1 copy of the cryptic. This is for sure a krypton with 1 copy of each versus the cryptic with 2 copies of the cryptic gene. It gets really confusing, and as far as we know, this is as accurate as we know for right now. You know, trying to work, you know, I've actually seen one breeder, he produced I think like 17 cryptic or krypton combinations, and another one produced, you know, just a couple dozen, and they're trying to figure out, you know, all the ins and outs of the genes, trying to work through all this. But as far as we know, this is the correct information. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Alina asks, how do I check if my ball python is a world's first? And that is a very good question. So if you actually have 2 ball pythons and you breed them together and you produce a hatchling that has a unique combination of genes, it's possible that you have the only one of its kind, a world's first. And pretty much the only place that I know of that you can kind of check to see if it's a world's first is over on the World of Ball Pythons. You can actually go over there and do a search for any combination, and you'll actually end up on a page that has the pictures for some examples of the snake, and then underneath the picture, usually they'll have the name of the person and the date that it was first produced. And in some cases, they'll just say unknown, we don't know who first produced it. But in a lot of cases, they'll actually have the name over there. And you can actually go over and try to take credit for your world's first if it's not actually listed over there. And kind of the thing that kind of tricks you up over there is you can actually, it really depends on the order of the genes when you're searching their database. I actually found kind of a glitch in their system. So you can actually search for pastel pinstripe, and it'll be completely different results than if you search for the pinstripe pastel. It depends on the order of the genes. Sometimes it'll bring up the snake and sometimes it won't. So if you're thinking you have the world's first, I'd probably jumble up all the different genes and make sure that it wasn't produced before. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.